I want to just say thank you to Rachel. That was a fabulous program
Yeah.
and really highlights some of the things that I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking a little bit about forest ecology and highlighted by this bird right here. But it was fascinating to me to see the guy in the tree that was trying to do the pollination, the work of native bees. And it really highlights the amount of ecosystem services that we get from pollinators. Rachel,
Yeah.
thank you for that illustration. It also highlights that there's so much that we need to know.
Yeah, I'm sure today you're gonna cover this in your talk, but it's cool how a lot of the presentations today have all kind of flown into each other, interrelated with each other. You know, so we're gonna go from pollinators into birds of prey, which birds of prey. Some of them, your flycatchers, definitely. Although I don't know if that's technically considered a bird of prey, but a lot of birds rely on your insects. And so it'll be, it's cool to see that interrelationship between these two topics.
It's interesting that you mentioned flycatchers. Flycatchers are one of the biggest groups of passerines. Passerines are
Okay, so they are
definitely not. They're predatory for sure, but they are very diverse because there are very diverse flies to catch.
Yeah. And Steve, I'm sure that Kent is going to tell us what that bird is here in a second, but it is 1:41. So with that, I will then just do a quick introduction. We're joined here today by Kent Woodruff. Kent is now a retired U.S. Forest Service biologist who studied quite a bit of songbird identification and monitoring studies through the Forest Service. Did quite a bit of work with beavers. Helped start Hawkwatch, I believe is the name of the organization, in the Chelan County area. I mean, really, Kent has had his hands on just about every wildlife program that's happened in Central Washington and beyond. So we're really, this is a treat to have him join us here today and talk about birds of prey. So thank you very much, Kent, for joining us, and take it away.
Including a project that you helped with. You neglected to mention that.
Yeah.
That's where I met Sean, around beaver ponds here in the Methow Valley. So I'm going to be watching my chat box and hoping to see some responses. I want to be a little bit interactive here, so I'll be eager to see what you can type, what the participants can type in here. So today's program is about this bird and its relation to forest management. I'm excited to have the opportunity. Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Ken Bevis, for the invitation to participate in this program. And thank you, WSU, for hosting. I think this is the first time I've had the chance to be part of the winter school program. So I'm eager to see the future of this program. I've gained a lot today. Mark Swanson's program was excellent. I appreciated David. I appreciated the camera program that you put together. I got my first game camera this year, so thanks for that. So I'm going to begin now to talk a little bit about the program that I've been involved with here. Let's see. So early in the late 20th century, the Forest Service initiated a partnership that I was in charge of, that I helped manage for more than 20 years, called the Chelan Ridge Raptor Migration Project. That was a partnership with Hawkwatch International, and it was a Forest Service project that we set the goals to contribute to raptor conservation, to try to get a better understanding of raptor migration, and then to share what we learned, like today. The landscape where we established was very interesting landscape. This whole area burned in 1970. This is called I can't remember the name of the fire. It's between Lake Chelan and the Methow Valley, the Methow River. It's the ridge between Lake Chelan and the Methow River. That's a little piece of blue right there. That's Lake Chelan. And this is the spot where we set up a research counting station. The top of that rock pile is where we've spent the last 20 years, more than 20 years, counting hawks as they go through. We initially said, let's determine what's going on by evaluating each year to year, do exactly the same thing, count for the same period of time, hawks that are migrating through. And it turns out what we found was the best place in Washington to view migrant hawks. Thousands of birds coming through each year gave us a chance to understand the trends each year and what's going on with the hawks at these sites. One of the things that we recognized was that it's valuable to, in places on ridges like this, to count the birds. But in the past, one of the things that they found was on ridges where hawks concentrated was a chance to shoot birds. In the early 1900s, this is a place called the Kittatinny Ridge in Pennsylvania. They had fall shooting for hawks going through, helping to alleviate the predators that were eating chickens and game birds to make things better for the landscape. It's interesting how our understanding evolves. So this is an example of what we used to do. Here's an example of what we do today, watching for a bird going by like this and avoiding shooting it, but instead marveling at the miracle of migration. It's really fascinating to stand on that rock pile and learn a little bit more about birds like this. That first bird was an accipiter. This is an accipiter. So the question was, what is that bird? There are several types of birds that we see going through the migration station. We see accipiters, which are woodland hawks, and that's why we're focusing on accipiters today. The smallest accipiter is this one right here, a sharp-shinned hawk. The next accipiter is a Cooper's hawk, and the largest accipiter is a goshawk. Buteos, falcons, and eagles are more examples of some of the birds that we count and record and actually capture at the trapping station. So this is an example of a bird going by. We put an owl on a stick so that the birds come close. The birds of prey hate owls. Owls wind up eating baby birds in the nest, and so they come, if they see an owl on a stick like that, they come and attack it, and they come close to us so we can identify them and see them going by. So this is an example of a sharp-shinned hawk going by, looking over his shoulder and saying, "What are you doing on that rock pile there?" So we counted for 2 years. We counted every bird that we could count, and we, like I said, we recognized that this turned out to be the best place in Washington to view migrant hawks. But we also decided that maybe if we capture some and take some measurements, maybe collect some feathers or learn a little bit about their blood, then maybe we can gain even more information about the raptors that we're seeing on this ridge. This is one of our helpers in the trapping blind, trying to lure in. He's got a starling on the end of that string, and that is trying to lure in the hawks from this box. If you look right there, you can see that's his face right there. Here he is in the trapping blind. And then we are able, with a starling, to draw in a sharp-shinned hawk like this, and they get tangled in the nets. Let me show you this right here. There are several nets here. That's a net pole. This is a net pole. This is a net pole. These are called mist nets that help catch the birds as they try to come in to get a starling. So then we take measurements, and in some cases we have taken blood and analyzed the blood for blood parasites and pesticides, determined what's going on with the birds in that manner. Look at the fat deposits that they have on them, weigh them and measure them and determine how healthy they are as they're going through. Here's some of the bands that we put on. One of the helpers that is holding some of the larger bands. These are for red-tailed hawks here. These are for eagles here. And catching an eagle is very exciting. One of the other things we were able to do once we captured the hawks is we were able to hand them to some of our visitors that would come, schools that would come visit and take a look at what we had. So for me, this is one of the very best parts of the project, was sharing what we were doing with young people. Like this person lives in the Met House. This is one of our teachers here in the Met House, but this young person is 25 years old now and no longer has beautiful blonde hair like that. She's a very accomplished young violinist here in the Valley. So some of the birds that we are able to study, this is a merlin. We did not know much about merlins until we started this project. Merlins were actually way more abundant than we thought as we began to understand the migration pattern. We really don't know much about their nesting strategies, but we know they're a woodland hawk and come through in the fall, but we don't think we know much about if we have them nesting here in Washington. There are a few merlins that nest in parks in and around Seattle. A friend of mine did some work there on the west side. So a merlin is a medium-sized falcon. This is our smallest falcon. This is an American kestrel, and they are mostly mouse eaters and grasshoppers especially. This is the largest falcon that we have. This is called a peregrine falcon. We occasionally get to see peregrines. That's pretty spectacular. There was a time when we didn't know we would continue to see peregrines. We thought we were looking at the last peregrines in the 1970s, but since starting the Chelan Ridge project, we learned that they have recovered nicely. This is releasing that peregrine. That's the fastest animal on the planet. Up to 200 miles an hour is how fast they fly. This is a northern harrier, which is an interesting bird because it captures prey by listening, flying low over the ground and listening. This facial disc is like an owl's facial disc that focuses sound, and this bird is able to hear prey in the grass and then dive down and catch it. This is a young harrier, they're fun to see. They're not real common on the ridge. This is a goshawk that I mentioned. We don't see, this is an adult goshawk. The gray plumage and white eye stripe is characteristic for goshawks. They're very aggressive in their nest defense. So maybe some of you forest landowners have goshawks on your property, but if so, you probably know it. And this sharpshin is one of the species that we like to see. It's actually one of the very most common. Almost half of the birds that we count in migration are sharp-shinned hawks. And that's why it's the focus of my talk today. We'll spend a little bit of time understanding the things that there are to understand about sharpshins, but we're going to tie that to forest health and forest ecology. As sharpshins get older, their eyes get really dark, and this is a particularly dark eye, so probably meaning that this bird is older, at least 4 or 5 years old. Here's a band that we put on that bird. This says Wright Bird Band, Washington, D.C. and it has a unique number on the band. If you write to the bird banding lab in Washington, D.C., you can find out where this bird was banded, where and when it was banded. And so it's fascinating to each of these bands cost about 3 cents. So it's a cheap way for us to gather some information. This bird right here, another old sharp-shinned hawk. This is a bird that was captured on the 8th of October in 2009. Remember that. This is a bird that was captured on the 10th of October in 2009. This is a young sharp-shinned hawk. The other one is an adult. And here's some information about those two birds. The adult sharp-shinned was banded here on the 5th of September 2009 in the Matanuska Valley in Alaska. I called and talked to the guy who banded that bird. We caught it here at Chelan Ridge in October, and then 2 days later we banded another bird, and that young sharp-shin, and it was reported dead here in January, 3 months later. Interestingly, this is a bird that was banded in 2002 that was also caught in October of 2009. It had made a migration south and a migration north, several migrations back and forth before we caught it in 2009. So it was a 7-year-old bird. Scott says, what are the migration routes? I'll show you here. This indicates what some of the birds that we banded. We're able to get some dots on the map. So the green dots are Cooper's hawks. One of the things that we're learning is from our station, the birds go maybe through in a more southeasterly direction. And the red tails, which are the red dots here, maybe they go through more towards Northern California. The yellow dots are the sharp-shinned hawks, and they too move into California. We think there's a Rocky Mountain flyway that comes this way. There is certainly a flyway that comes across the Great Lakes, and then another flyway on the East Coast, where there are thousands of birds that come through in Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth is one of the very best hotspots to see migrant hawks. I was standing on a ridge here in Bozeman, Montana, about right here, and saw hundreds of eagles going through in one day this fall. So there are several corridors that the raptors take. We just happened to stumble on one of the best places in Washington right here. So we talk a lot about accipiters and spend some time. This happens to be a Cooper's hawk. It helps to begin to recognize how they live and what they do. Accipiters are forest hawks. They are very significantly tied to the forest, and that's why they're an important bird to talk about today, because it gives us a chance to think about forest management. So we'll get into that here in just a little bit. Here's a sharp young helper at the station this is an adult sharp-shinned hawk fly away. This happens to be my youngest son, Taylor. He's now 26. This is my friend, Chris Street. And just after he caught an eagle, he was very excited to be able to handle this golden eagle carefully and learn a little bit more about it. We put a satellite transmitter on this eagle and then let it go, and it traveled clear to southern Nevada. We could track it we got a beep from the transmitter about every hour. So once again, I'm pointing out that accipiters like this are woodland hawks, and so I want to talk about the connection to forests and accipiters here in a minute. Here's some of the data some of the interesting facts. In the 20 years that I was leading the project, we counted more than 40,000 raptors in migration. And over 8,000 of those were captured and banded. And then we had a chance to visit with more than 5,000 people that came up and saw us at our research station there. So here's the important question. What does this have to do with private forest management? All of you private forest, raise your hand if you're a private forest manager. So I can't see you, but it's important for me to begin to recognize how many, Sean, how many people do you think are here today?
Well, we had 1,400 people register. There are currently 74 in attendance in this session. While only 6 of them have clicked to raise their hand, if I had to guess, I'd probably say close to 60 of these people watching own forest land.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. So this bird, as I said, relies on forests for their ability to raise young, to build a nest and feed their young. They have to find food in the forest. And then one of the key things that we know is that as they migrate through, they migrate in and close to the forest. So everything that about this particular bird is that it is a forest hawk, a small accipiter. This is another adult sharp-shinned hawk. This is an adult male, a very particularly dark red eye. So one thing happened last week, and it helped shape the presentation that I wanted to make today. Somebody that lives here close by, somebody that I bird with quite a little bit, she asked me, she has a pretty sizable piece of forested property that burned last summer, and said she wanted to know what they can do. We had about an hour-long talk about some of the things that she needed to think about, but then it gave me the chance to think about some of the things that I wanted to talk to the 74 of you that are joining me today. And this is a picture of our fires here in the Methow last summer. And a friend of mine over in the Okanagan Islands, maybe some of you know Lee Johnson, who has had a place there. He had a platform near his property where great gray owls would nest every year, and several people came and visited him and saw great gray owls. Well, sadly, the platform that I actually put up near his property and the forest all around him and his home all burned to the ground. So things are not good for the habitat around Lee's place. But it really kind of I thought about that and thought about the question from my friend: what can we do to take care of the forest? And I think a key thing is that we've heard that we've had lots of press. Even Rachel casually mentioned forest health, a healthy forest. She was talking about a heavily harvested forest and some of the health of pollinators in a healthy forest. Do me a favor, please, right now, type in the chat what you think is healthy forest. I'll see what you can tell me. Hans says diverse in different stages. Thank you, Hans. Diversity of plants and animals, diversity, any forest without urban homes, abundance of flora and fauna. Good. Any more? A stand of trees with all age classes with openings. Through various disturbances, very good. Fire resilient, several species, a wide variety of trees and shrubs. Thank you. Historic forests with frequent low intensity fire. Okay, so now I want to spend a little bit of time. I'm going to refer to some of the lessons that I learned from this little accipiter, but also my friend or my hero, Aldo Leopold. So here's my after quite a bit of time trying to understand what a healthy forest is, it's a forest within a landscape with integrity. And integrity is a very carefully chosen word. It's something that means whole, or these things here. But now I want to walk carefully with you through how that integrity comes together. And this is a key thing that I gained from 30 years in the Forest Service, managing public forests for integrity. So I'm going to have you get your fingers ready on the chat, because I want your help here as we go forward here for a little bit. Forests are complex. They are made up of elements and function. We'll look at this in a little bit here, but let's look at these elements first. David was talking about black bears and the black-tailed deer, but here are some of the things. There's skippers that I could think of, but I didn't actually put in any native bees here. Native bees are a very excellent reminder that bees are a very important part of forests. One thing to know is that there are more than 400 species of moths in healthy forests. Our mixed conifer forests here on the east side are full of moths, full of a diverse suite of moths. So diversity was a common word that you used here. Help me jot some things down right here in elements, in some of the things that occur in a forest, that in your forest you that I forgot to put in here. Scott, I see your question about accipiters on the west side. Yes, sharpshins and Cooper's hawks and goshawks are common on the west side. So please put some worms. Good. Salamanders and snakes, mountain chickadees, Clark's nutcrackers. Good. Help me think of some more of the things that I didn't put in here. Brush piles. Good. Bald eagles, Douglas squirrels. Good. Grosbeaks, white-headed woodpeckers. Yep. William, you must be on the east side. Invasive holly. So these are all portions of the elements that are in forests. Nettle, possums, pools and ponds, streams, those are all elements. Thank you so much. Flycatchers, owls, not necessarily just animals, but so I don't see anybody listing flowers yet. There are lots of flowers that Rachel was talking about. Cones and seeds, lupins, good. Slugs, thank you. So now all of those things are all important to recognize. And in this discussion today, forests are so complex that we couldn't begin to list all the things that are here. So now let's go to the next step here. Here are some of the things that forests do: evaporative cooling and carbon capture, animal and plant reproduction. The bee pollination is something that occurs in forests. These are the functions. Woodpeckers drilling holes. That's part of the function that occurs in forests. Can you think of some of the things that I didn't think of here? That what forests do? Water storage, that's good. Water filtration, breaking down waste, decay, that's excellent. Water retention, carbon storage, oxygen production, recreation, yep, that's good. Windbreaks, evaporative cooling. Thank you, Karen. So now let's go to the next piece of forest. And that's how things flow in the forests. So we've got all the elements. we've got the functions that occur in forests. The flow of things in the forest is how energy is transferred. So some things eat other things. Bees gather nectar. Flycatchers catch flies. Pollen is produced and dispersed. So some of the things that occur, the flow that occurs. So Jenny, thank you. So that's a flow. Lichens fall to the forest floor. That's excellent. Nitrogen cycling. So help me with some more flow items. Yep, carbon sequestration. That's actually a function. Erosion. Erosion is the way is soil going downhill. That's flow for sure. Snow melts and seedlings grow. Good. Thank you. So now one more thing here, one more aspect of forests. We're going to talk about disturbance. So there are things that you forest landowners know about disturbance. Disturbance is disturbance bad? No, disturbance is not all bad. There are things that we want, there are large scale disturbances that we want to be careful to limit as much as possible. But commander rust is something that is really valuable in the forest because it creates dead top pines that then are super hotel trees that last a long time. We like seeing commander rust trees because they are selected by woodpeckers. Williamson sapsuckers are most abundant bird in ponderosa pine forests. So what's another disturbance that I didn't think of? Oh, they're good. Jane, thank you. Fragmentation from development, that's a disturbance. Good. I didn't think of that. Deer stripping bark. Yep, good. Oh, avalanche shoots. Good. Invasive species. Bear injury. Good. Thank you. Invasive species. Browsing on saplings. Mountain beavers. Oh, I didn't think about mountain beavers. Good, Jenny. Wind storms, wind throw. Yep, that's good. Development, Scott. Thank you. So now here's something that I want to put all in perspective. So let's talk about forest health. Is a forest healthy if it's got the appropriate amount of disturbance? Things are flowing like they need to flow. All of the functions that we just talked about, the functions and all of the elements that should be there are there. So a healthy forest is something that is, I really, really value the opportunity to talk about some of the things that I gained in trying to understand as a Forest Service manager. We want to try to provide healthy forests. One thing that was common for us to say, well, let's thin some trees out and try to make the forest healthy, but that is just not necessarily how to create a healthy forest. So I'm glad to have the opportunity to share this. I took some time to think about some of the guidelines that I might prescribe to people that I gained in my time in the Forest Service. And one of the first thing is if we're careful that even in our big fires, as Rachel pointed out, in some of those big landscape fires, high intensity fires, there are species, bee species especially, that say, yippee, finally we got a big fire. We've been waiting for this big fire to set things back and start over, create some bare ground and help us. And so now that's not necessarily a bad thing. The integrity of the forest can remain intact after fire. But one of the things that we most forest landowners, including Forest Service, public landowners, don't necessarily want to see a whole hillside of black toothpicks. Forests matter to all of us as a place for recreation, a place for solitude, a place for water storage, as we just talked about. So we don't necessarily want big fires. So we can actually moderate the behavior of fires at times, if we give firefighters an opportunity to steer fires that are coming. There are more fires coming for sure, but the ability for us to manage our forest landscapes thoughtfully by maintaining all of those functions and elements is kind of what I wanted to get at here. So if we keep these pieces together, the forest will generally take care of itself, especially the soil. So now here, when we're setting priorities and trying to make decisions on what we're doing in our forest landscapes, there here in the Methow, we have a little handbook that we hand out to all new landowners. It's called the Good Neighbor Handbook. It's something that is produced by our local land trust. But there's a book that has been really valuable to me in my career called Wildlife, Forests, and Forestry. The author is Malcolm Hunter, and it's a really, really, really good book. And it gives a really good understanding of how to think about forests in diverse ways. But in my estimation, the very best guide to managing landscapes is the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold, and his essay in the back of the Sand County Almanac called The Land Ethic. I sat down and reread that over the last few days, and it is something that I think all of us as forest landowners. I own a piece of land in Iowa where we have a significant forest piece, and his essay, The Land Ethic, is something we all need to know. And he notes that we're writing a signature on the land. And here's another key lesson. Finally, when you do your homework, you are the person that gets to be in charge of how your landscape looks. If it's healthy and prepared for the disturbances that are coming, then you can trust yourself that you know as much as anybody about your landscape, especially if you spent time out there. So here's some 10 commandments that I put together that I think are the key things for us to think about as landscape managers. This comes from my time in the Forest Service, but also my time managing a piece of land in Iowa. Repairing habitat is important. We talk about managing trees, but understory vegetation is good. Ken might have mentioned snags in his presentation this morning. I doubt it though. He's not much of a person on snags. I'm teasing. Insects and diseases are absolutely important. Sloppy, messy forests are healthy forests. When there's things that are falling apart, mistletoe and root rot are things that happen in forests, and that's part of the machinery out there. Weeds, we want to avoid weeds, take care of the soil. I don't believe there's anything like that is a catastrophic, ecologically catastrophic, that is even a fire. We talk about catastrophic fire a lot, and I don't think that's necessarily real. Ecosystems know how to cope with and respond to big events. We're going to see big events in the coming years, but they can be part of ecosystem health. So here's a key important. Litter fall and decay is important to what happens out there. We need to keep working to add ecological conditions. In my garden, I feed the soil every year as much as I possibly can, and it's healthier because of it. So this is a picture I took after our fires last year. This is a three-toed woodpecker, and they respond. They're highly associated with fire, post-fire activity. Here you can see in this tree, that's a wood borer beetle hole, and this is a wood borer beetle hole. They bored in there and then laid eggs, and then the larvae hatched, and this woodpecker is trying to get to those larvae. That's a function that's going on in this forest, and this woodpecker is one of the species that said, "Yippee! I'm glad we finally had a fire." So, how does this relate to that little accipiter? So, the forest, if we have a healthy forest, we have healthy woodpecker populations, healthy wood borer beetle populations, healthy songbird populations. And what do accipiters eat? Accipiters eat almost all exclusively. Little accipiters eat little songbirds. Bigger accipiters eat, this bird right here eats mostly warblers and flycatchers and sparrows. Bigger accipiters, goshawks eat grouse. Cooper's hawks eat woodpeckers. But they're all tied to forests. Healthy forests grow healthy accipiter populations. So here's something that Leopold said that I admire. Once again, you're writing your signature on the land for others to read. So in the Sand County Almanac, Leopold refers to cutting down a great big oak tree and chronicles as the saw goes through the tree the years back where the things that happened over the course of the tree that's cut down. And yet he documents that is a mark of thinking about how to carefully care for the landscape. He knew that cutting a tree down is important to put wood in the fireplace. So we are removing forest products is not necessarily a bad thing. I was lucky enough to visit the Leopold Foundation, the Leopold Shack in Wisconsin. Has anybody been there? Have any of you visited the Leopold Foundation in central Wisconsin? If not, that's in a place called Baraboo, Wisconsin. It's worth a visit. Here's the final word. Whether we're successful stewards will be determined how beneficial our actions are to as many of the neighbors as we can in our neighborhood. So let's together keep soaring and taking care of forests. Thank you very much. Well, I'll leave that one on there. Sean, I'm happy to take some questions.
Feel free. I think everyone was so what's the word I'm looking for? Entranced by your conversation and engaged in the discussion you had going on. I don't think anyone has even thought about how to ask a question. But feel free, if you guys have something, to please put it in. You know, I think this might be the first time we've ever had Kent give a presentation for extension. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kent. At least the first time in my tenure here.
Yeah, I wanted to make it good because it's probably the last.
I hope not, because that means that only 74 people got to enjoy that conversation. There's certainly quite a bit of philosophical ideology to take away from that.
William says, what do sharpshoons nest in? So thank you for that. Often lodgepole stands, smaller, more dense stands, they build a nest up against the trunk of the tree, a smaller tree. So that's one of the things to be watching for is mid-successional forests are real valuable for sharpshins. I did see a question there about bird boxes. Bird boxes are valuable. snags are more valuable. Snags are simply, bird boxes are simply an alternative. It's an indication that we're trying to make up for missing snag habitat and missing woodpecker activity. Woodpeckers are primary cavity excavators, and then there are lots of species that take advantage of the holes that woodpeckers provide. I'm working on a project right now out east of Brewster and Bridgeport. We're putting up kestrel boxes because there are no snags out there, and we're trying to enhance our kestrel population out there. How does wildfire smoke? Scott says, how does wildfire smoke affect migration patterns? Well, you know, we've speculated a lot about wildfires and affecting migration, but I actually don't think it affects birds that much. They travel pretty rapidly. They travel 20 or 30 miles an hour in migration once they really get serious about moving. And in an hour, a big fire, you can get through some of the areas that fire is affected by fairly rapidly. Sand County Almanac is the name of that book. It's a book that everybody needs to know, especially the land ethic in there. Yeah, thanks, Sean, for posting that. The Leopold Foundation is something to check out online. I'm not sure if I don't think Lee is a master bander. He's an old timer, just has lived in the Okanagan Highlands for a long time. The birds that I've shown are daytime migrants. One of the things that's fascinating is on that ridge where this friend of mine, Devin, is standing and releasing this eagle, there are hundreds and hundreds of owls that go through at night. So saw-whet owls and flammulated owls and things. I can't quite see this question, Sean. This last one that says
from William or from John?
I missed it. The last word is that I can see is Winthrop.
So it looks like he was just making a comment about Ken Bevis. Paid good attention to the snags this morning. He was referring to the joke you made earlier.
Okay. I know Bevis wouldn't miss the opportunity to talk about snags.
Jane made a mention. She said, I tend to run my saw up and down the base of a dead tree to break the bark and season the wood. I think it helps the snags stay up longer. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. That in Jane, are you east side or west side?
She's Spokane area.
Mm-hmm. So the ability for snags to stand depends on how dry they are. So that's a good point.
Karen says, do you make site visits?
I actually have spent some time with landowners here in the Metro. Where are you, Karen?
Karen, I think that's going to require drinks and a feast because he's not on a government salary anymore.
Diane says large deer populations. We have okay, I see that. Thank you. We have deer populations here that are, I think, overabundant, and so that does tend to be a problem with recovering forests, especially the browsing that deer do is sometimes overbearing in forest recovery. So Diane, I don't have much for you, except that there's a study that I just read about here earlier that forest deer populations retreat to places that aren't hunted very heavily, and so inviting people to come to your property and remove some is not a bad thing.
There was a question earlier, and you may have answered it. We were going pretty fast there for a sec.
I was trying to read fast.
Yeah. Do all the birds you talked about migrate? It seems that there might have been a few that don't. I guess probably to confine that to birds of prey.
So I've studied almost all of the 256 bird species we have here in the Methow, and most of the raptor populations do migrate. We see ospreys and turkey vultures and kestrels and merlins and goshawks. Goshawks are interesting. I'll share this one story. We found a method to mark the birds so that we could track their migrations with a satellite transmitter that was solar powered. The heavy part of a transmitter is the battery. So we found with these solar panels on the back of a bird, they could last, and they could be much lighter than traditional telemetry. So we put transmitters on Cooper's hawks, which hadn't been done before, on harriers, which hadn't been done before, and on goshawks. We put these satellite transmitters on goshawks. One of the things we found out about goshawks, we'd catch them. What we know on this migration site on the ridge is that there were everything was coming through in the fall. We know that they're moving south, so we're catching them and banning them and releasing them. But once we put satellite transmitters on 2 different goshawks, that's all we were able to mark. Those birds actually flew north after we let them go, and up to 8,000 feet in elevation. So it was fascinating to us that they did not follow what we expected. The goshawks were actually stuck around more locally and hunted probably grouse up high. And so what we know, even these eagles like this picture are migrants, pretty significant migrants, moving south generally. The dots,
Sorry, continue.
The dots on that map help us know that almost everything's moving south.
I remember I was doing a drone study for DNR, and we were actually doing low flights over their Webster nursery, looking at seedling success in their nursery. And there was a nested goshawk there, and she was not happy and was chasing our drone around, trying to take it down.
They're very aggressive in their nest defense.
Yeah. Can you I know goshawks are kind of a topic of concern and certainly contention in the forestry world. Can you talk a little bit about their habitat preferences and their structure preferences, and maybe why we've seen some decline in their species?
So my talk today is about the ecosystem network, the net of things that we provide out there. One thing that we did for a long time is we said, well, we need to manage for goshawks, so we need to manage for big trees and an open understory. So that's how we manage for goshawks. Well, wait a minute. I think it was William there that was asking about owls. Here's a key to understanding raptors is food. It's always about food. And so if you grow lots of grouse and snowshoe hares, we know goshawks eat ruffed grouse and snowshoe hares. That's an abundant food item for them. If there's lots of snowshoe hares on big snowshoe hare years, then the goshawks are healthy and abundant. One thing that I think we know is that goshawks will nest in almost anything as long as there's lots of food. So the ability to manage for goshawks is taking care of the food resource, the other layers of a healthy forest.
Seems like we almost need to have a whole webinar series on managing the food web.
Yeah, well, and the everything web, understanding all of the life in soil. A handful of soil is billions of microbes. That's the place. Somebody said worms is one of the things that I left out in the elements, but there is so much to understand about starting right there at the soil and making sure that that's lively and healthy, and then on up the chain. If we grow lots of songbirds, we're going to have accipiters. If we grow lots of grouse, we're going to take good care of goshawks.
Jane had one final question, and then we'll go ahead and end it there. She was just asking about some limbing strategies. This might be a bit out of the bird ballpark.
I see, Jane. Thank you. So this is something I just did on a piece of forest land. We took the fallen trees and laid them down on the ground. That's the best thing we can do, and it really does provide better habitat. Well, actually, one of the things to think about is there are winners and losers in everything that we do. There are probably chipmunks that say, wait, I was having such a good time running underneath that log. Now you laid it on the ground, I can't quite get underneath it anymore. But we think that it's actually more valuable on the ground because there's interaction between the ground and the wood.
Or snowshoe hares for your previous example.
Yeah, snowshoe hares, one of the things after fire, when the trees fall over and make a big pick up sticks, jing jang, that's exactly what we want for the fossorial subnivean species. The animals that live under the snow are beneficial when we have just a jack straw of down wood.
All right. Well, with that, then I would say thank you very much, Kent, for coming out today.
Thank you all for being here.